Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. It's Tuesday, January the 20th. I'm going to be calling our in-camera session to order at 4:15 p.m. I'm going to ask if there is any disclosure of pecuniary interest around the table before we start. Seeing none, I'm going to go on to item number 3, closed session. Today we'll be proceeding in closed session in accordance with the Municipal Act to address items pertaining to personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, Section 239(2)B, labor relations or employee negotiations, Section 239(2)D, compensation review, and a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiations carried on or to be carried on by or on behalf of the municipality or local board. That's my wordsmithing of the afternoon. Section 239K, ongoing ACL negotiations. Can I get a mover and seconder to proceed into closed session? Moved by Councillor Darrell, second by Councillor Adam. All in favour? That is carried unanimously. Once council has come back from our closed, I will be coming back to do a rise and report publicly at the open council meeting. Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and we apologize for the delay in our start time today, but we were delayed due to a longer closed meeting than we had anticipated. So I'm going to be calling our meeting to order at, I'm just going to give the exact time, 6:39 p.m. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement, the municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mississauga Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and the waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on, are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none. Moving on to item number 3. Earlier today, Council passed a motion to proceed into closed session at 4:15 p.m. to consider business as permitted under the Municipal Act and as listed on today's agenda. The motion was passed in a public session streamed live and was in accordance with our closed meeting policy. In the continuing interest of transparency, I can report at this open meeting the outcomes of today's closed session. Council approved the closed session minutes from December 16th, 2025. That was the last time that Council met in closed session. Council received information from staff regarding ongoing negotiations with ACL. Council also received information and discussed matters related to an identifiable individual. And finally, Council received information from staff regarding a review of staff compensation. Can I please, there were no directions given to staff. We just received these 3 items for information. So can I get a mover and a seconder for these actions? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favour? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to announcements, updates, and recognition. The first thing we're going to start with is New Year connections. Thank you, everyone who joined us for the New Year's levee as well as the Swim and Skate event last weekend. Can't believe it was just last weekend. It feels a lot longer than that ago, but it was so wonderful to see so many neighbors come out and celebrate and talk to us at the start of a new year. A special thank you, of course, goes to our dedicated staff who work behind the scenes to make these events a success, and particular our events staff, Jeannie and Cheryl. Your hard work, your incredible hard work at every event and commitment help to create a welcoming, enjoyable, and experiences for our community. I also want to take a moment to thank our winter maintenance staff. This has been a relenting winter. It has really been challenging. So a sincere thank you, especially to our snowplow operators and roads crews for their continued hard work. Mother Nature has really kept them busy with challenging conditions brought on not just by snow, but of ice and the combination thereof. Their dedication and their long hours and commitment to keeping our roads safe are really, truly appreciated. So thank you from everyone here at the council table. If you get a chance and you see the staff out on the street, you can take the opportunity to thank them yourself. But we really do appreciate everything that they do to support our community through the winter months, and it's far from over. Moving on to an announcement about our 2026 Fire Protection Grant. In the fall of 2025, PHFES applied to the Ontario Fire Marshal Protection Grant, and in December 2025, we were made aware that our application was successful. So the Corporation of the Municipality of Port Hope is approved for $52,821, and funding will be used to support the continuation of the cancer prevention program and to purchase bunker gear racking for Fire Station 1 to ensure limited cross-contamination of PPE and gear for firefighters, as well as purchase additional equipment and spare PPE bunker gear to support the program. PHFES would also purchase lithium-ion battery containment suppression tools to assist in dealing with battery fires. All really important additions. And I also want to report that I've just returned from the Roma conference in Toronto. I came back this afternoon, and that's the Rural Ontario Municipalities Annual Conference. It was an interesting 2.5-day event with plenary sessions and other breakout sessions. I was joined this year by Councillor Clare, and I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Clare for a few words of some impressions. But before so, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I think went very well from the municipal perspective. The first is I want to acknowledge and celebrate Kate Ingram for her amazing presentation during a very important, I think probably for me, one of the best sessions I attended on communications and how to deal with misinformation. And on the flip side, getting right information out to constituents, it's a challenge that every municipality is now faced with, especially because there's a lack of traditional media in almost every community, and I think there were lots of great ideas that were shared, and it was wonderful to have Port Hope and the Walton Street project highlighted in terms of the award-winning communications that were done, and I think the audience really did appreciate knowing what we did well in this community. So it was a wonderful way to highlight Port Hope at the conference. I also had an opportunity to meet directly with three ministers, Minister Lecce, Minister Oosterhoff, and Minister Smith on issues from broadband to infrastructure to the new energy project in this community. And I believe there's going to be some very important announcements as well as very critical meetings that will be happening in Port Hope in the next short while. So now I'm going to turn it over to Councillor Clare.
Thank you. Yeah, it was an interesting couple of days. I did really enjoy the opportunity to connect with other elected officials from similar sized municipalities and compare notes about challenges and opportunities. There was one really interesting session on a data project for rural communities being led through the University of Guelph that I think it'll be important to keep our eyes on, that's looking to increase access by rural municipalities to key metrics around in our communities related to health, economy, and adaptation. I had hoped to walk away with some inspiration on some other key issues like housing. Unfortunately, the key takeaways were we're all in the same boat and nobody has yet really figured out how to do it. So I think, I was hearing some other municipalities who are working along the same lines of what we're doing here under the leadership of our director and also the work of the intermunicipal task force. So I do think we're on the right track here. I didn't hear anything that others are doing that we aren't already looking at. The same was I spent the afternoon yesterday doing a deep dive into sustainable financial planning. And again, the key takeaway was validating that the conversations we're having here in Port Hope are the right conversations and really keeping an eye on that infrastructure deficit, being mindful of the pressures of inflation and the increasing cost to some of the responsibilities that have been downloaded onto municipalities. So that was validating that we're having the right conversations here. I wish I could say I was coming back with some magic bullets that could help us through these challenges, but still it was really interesting to hear from some other voices and to recognize the commonalities really in terms of these challenges.
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's a combination of a great support group experience in understanding the commonalities of the challenges right across the municipalities. Great to be validated in some of the directions that we're taking in, and networking around some of the nuggets of maybe good practices, maybe not best practices, but good practices, and always good to hear from the various ministers in bear pit situations. And this year was a bit different because there were two different bear pits rather than one, where we had an opportunity to ask questions directly to ministers and get a sense of the lay of the land for future, what the next year is going to bring and what some of the future priorities as well as funding opportunities are going to be. So does anybody else have any other updates that they would like to share around the table? Okay, seeing none. It's now time for our youth councillors and reports from our youth councillors. So, Leah or Emily first? Would Leah, do you want to go first? Yeah? Okay.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Council. Since our last meeting, I attended the New Year's Levy, where I got the chance to converse with Council and members of the community, engaging in discussion in a more social environment. As well, I attended the New Year's free skate and swim, where I participated in the skating portion. Not only was this a fun and welcoming event for residents of Port Hope, there was also the presence of council who were there and open about speaking to the public. It was very well attended. I had the pleasure of attending the annual Port Hope budget meeting held on January 13th. It was interesting to see all the organization and planning that goes towards the structure and operation of Port Hope. I was very impressed on how well prepared David Baxter and his team were. It made it easy for someone like me who had never attended a budget meeting to understand and be able to get a feel for everything that was going on. I was able to voice my opinions in the interest of youth throughout the meeting and got a chance to share my opinion on the removal of the Barrett Street walking bridge. Any questions or concerns I had at the meeting were both addressed and answered. I found there was a lot of information given and discussed in this one meeting. Looking back, it might have been a little easier to grasp if the meeting was spread over 2 days. But overall, it was a good experience, and I hope to attend more budget-related meetings in the future. Recently, I have been spending more time after school at the Youth Hub. I find it's a great place to spend time with welcoming staff and loads of activities to do. I enjoyed gathering with friends there at the Youth Hub and making use of their games. Coming up, January the 22nd, the Youth Hub Advisory Council will be meeting at the Youth Hub, and are welcoming youth to come and share their opinions about the Youth Hub and any ideas they have for it. Finally, coming up, I look forward to attending the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting, as well as the Civic Awards meeting.
Thank you very much.
Good evening, Council. I unfortunately missed the last meeting back in December, so I would just like to start off by saying I hope everyone had a great holiday season and a very happy new year. I was quite pleased to hear about the new plans for Port Hope High School next year. I think that could turn into something even more amazing for our community. Since I missed the December meeting, I'll be talking about what I've done in both December and so far in January. During December, I was in the Santa Claus Parade and I attended many of the skates at Jack Burger, including the Skate with Santa and the Free New Year's one. I was also downtown and participated in the Candlelight Festival, and I enjoyed seeing so many people out in Port Hope. So far in January, I've attended the Civic Awards Committee meeting, and I'm looking forward to the next one in February. I will also be going to the Environmental Advisory Committee meeting this Thursday and the Youth Action Delegation meeting in early February. The final thing I'll be talking about is the 2026 municipal budget. Unfortunately, I couldn't attend the meeting, but I do have some thoughts. From a youth perspective, it's very encouraging to see that the 2026 budget focus on the long-term planning, safety, and community well-being. These decisions matter to us because we'll be living with their impacts well into the future. Youth are engaged and hopeful, and we look forward to continuing to be a part of the conversation shaping Port Hope's future. That's all from me. Thank you and have a great night.
Thank you very much for both those excellent reports. And boy, did we make the right decision to have youth councillors join us. And thank you very much for all your involvement in all the things that are happening in the community. Thank you. Okay, moving on to our delegations. It is now time for delegations. We have 2 delegations on the agenda tonight, and both will be joining us virtually. And please, a reminder to both of our presenters that you have 10 minutes to present, and we do adhere to those timelines. So the first presenter is Jack Gibbons, the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, regarding investing in wind and solar energy and energy storage to meet Ontario's future electricity needs. So at this point, I'd like to ask our presenter to unmute their microphone and speak and share their screen, and the clerk will be following the time.
Madam Mayor and members of council, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. I'm Jack Gibbons from the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, and I'm also a former Toronto Hydro Commissioner. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you tonight about Port Hope's electricity future. But first, I'd like to tell you a bit about the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. We were established in 1997 to promote the phase-out of Ontario's 5 dirty coal-fired power plants. And we worked on that campaign for 17 years until the last coal plant was shut down in 2014. And now we're working to phase out our gas-fired power plants and lower our electricity bills. And tonight I would like to briefly compare wind and solar and new nuclear according to 4 criteria, namely cost, timing, reliability, and electricity potential. This slide shows the costs of wind, solar, and new nuclear electricity. The bar graph on the far right shows the cost of new nuclear electricity in cents per kilowatt hour. And as the bar graph shows, the cost of new nuclear is 2 to 8 times greater than the cost of new wind and solar. So if we build the world's largest nuclear station in Port Hope, our electricity rates will rise. On the other hand, we can make our electricity more affordable by investing in much lower cost wind and solar power. Now, according to OPG, their proposed new nuclear reactors will come in service between 2040 and 2048. That is, it will take more than 20 years to complete this nuclear project. On the other hand, new wind and solar projects can be built in 6 to 24 months. Therefore, wind and solar is the quickest option to phase out our gas-fired power plants and to reduce our dependency on American energy imports. Now, we all know that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. But the good news is that when wind and solar are combined with batteries, they can meet at least 99.5% of our electricity needs. And they can do this at a lower cost than new nuclear reactors. And in this context, it's important to remember that there is no electricity generation technology that operates for 100% of the hours of the year. For example, historically, our nuclear fleet has been offline for more than 20% of the time. And when our nuclear reactors are offline, we use our gas-fired power plants for backup. The really good news is that we have a huge wind and solar potential in Ontario. For example, Great Lakes offshore wind turbines could produce more than 100% of Ontario's electricity needs. And we could use OPG's Wesleyville site to connect a Lake Ontario wind farm to Hydro One's transmission grid. In addition, solar power with a footprint equal to only 0.4% could also meet all of Ontario's electricity needs. And really good news for Port Hope is that that a solar farm on OPG's Wesleyville site could produce enough electricity to power every single home in Port Hope. So in conclusion, Madam Mayor and members of council, OPG can create good jobs in Port Hope and lower our electricity bills by investing in wind and solar power. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them.
Thank you very much for the presentation. The recommended motion that is in front of us this evening is to receive this presentation for information. Can I get a mover and seconder on that? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Mink. Any questions, any comments? Councillor Clare.
I'd just like to say, I think, I know that this is going to be a long conversation as a community, and I appreciate the delegation. I think it's an important part of the overall conversation, and I think notably it's the first delegation that we've had on the topic, other than from OPG and those that are officially part of that process. So I think it's great to see community starting to engage with us on the conversation around the new plans at Wesleyville.
Thank you. And just to reiterate, of course, we will be conducting our own separate engagement process once we have a little bit more information as well. So it's still extremely early days. Councillor Less.
Thank you, Mr. Gibbons. Have you engaged with OPG with this information?
Well, yes, we've put out reports. We put out a report about Port Hope's electricity future. It's on our website, and I'm sure OPG has read it.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we've got a mover and seconder, so all in favor? And we have a motion passing that. Thank you again for the delegation. Moving on to the next delegation, 7.2, Alexandra Gilagi, Impact Assessment Officer, Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, IAC, and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, CNSC, regarding integrated assessment process for OPG's proposed new nuclear at Wesleyville project. And again, this presentation is virtual. So can I please ask our presenter to unmute the microphone and speak and share the screen? Thank you.
Thank you. I hope everyone could see my presentation and hear me well. Thank you so much for having us tonight, Mayor Hankivsky and councillors. I'm Alessandra Salagi. I'm an Impact Assessment Officer at the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. Tonight, I'm here with Candida Chanchi, our Director at Review Panels, and Julie Lowry, our Panel Manager, and also with my CNAC colleagues, Marina Martin, Amy Rupert, and Nicole Simon. I'd like to start off by acknowledging that I'm speaking from Montreal on the unceded traditional territory of the Mohawk Nation, a gathering place for many Indigenous peoples. The purpose of this presentation is to introduce who we are as the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada and the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission in regard to the proposed new nuclear at Wesleyville project, provide an overview of our integrated assessment process, and discuss our plans for public participation. So I'll start by explaining a little bit more about who we are as departments and what we do. So the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, also known as IAC, is a federal agency that reports to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. The role of IAC is to lead federal impact assessments. We manage the process of gathering the information needed to understand all the potential impacts of proposed projects. In doing so, we are supported by a federal impact assessment committee of technical experts composed of other federal departments and agencies, such as Environment and Climate Change Canada, Health Canada, and Fisheries and Oceans Canada. IAC is also responsible for public engagement and consultation with Indigenous peoples. For example, we prepare public notices, publish documents on the Canadian Impact Assessment Registry, organize virtual or in-person sessions, and hold consultation activities with Indigenous communities affected by the project. So I'll now turn it over to Amy from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission for a brief overview of the role of the CNSC.
Hello, Mayor and Council. Very happy to be here tonight. I am an Environmental Review Officer, and with me is my colleague Nicole Simon, a Senior Project Officer in our Advanced Reactor Licensing Division. And tonight we're here to support our IAC colleagues in walking through the integrated impact assessment process for new nuclear projects. The CNSC regulates the use of nuclear energy and materials to protect the health and safety and security and the environment, and to implement Canada's international commitments to the peaceful use of nuclear energy and to disseminate objective scientific, technical, and regulatory information to the public. The CNSC is responsible for regulating the entire life cycle of a nuclear project and does this through transparent and publicly accessible licensing phases that include the initial license to prepare site, a license to construct, a license to operate, and a license to decommission. The CNSC staff ensure that the Commission has all the necessary and relevant and timely information prior to rendering a decision on each of the respective licenses. The Commission is a quasi-judicial administrative tribunal set up at arm's length from government and is independent from any political or private sector influence. It makes decisions with respect to regulatory safety and is independent from CNSC staff. CNSC staff is the body of scientific, technical, and engineering and administrative professionals that provide advice to the Commission and carry out nuclear oversight. Back to you, Alessandra.
Thank you. So now we will talk about why we're here, which is the new nuclear at Wesleyville project. So in quick overview, Ontario Power Generation OPG is proposing the construction of a new nuclear power plant in Port Hope. Several nuclear reactor technologies will be considered for this project. And as proposed, the project would provide up to 10,000 megawatts of new nuclear generating capacity and operate for 78 years. And this generating capacity is anticipated to qualify as a designated project under the Impact Assessment Act. Now I'll turn over to how we work together on integrated assessments, the importance of the integrated assessment process. So impact assessments are a process used by the federal government to ensure that proposed projects have considered potential positive and negative health, environmental, economic, and social effects that may impact the lives and rights of Indigenous peoples and the public, and propose measures to reduce or minimize the negative effects of projects and enhance their positive effects. When a project includes activities regulated under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, also known as the NSCA, IAC works with the CNSC to conduct an integrated assessment. So IAC and the CNSC cooperate with the common objective that all the requirements are achieved in a single integrated assessment as one project, one assessment. So together we assess potential effects over the life cycle of the project and consider the first licensing phase of a nuclear facility, which is the site preparation. So the outcome of an integrated assessment is two decisions. The first is on the outcome of the impact assessment, and if that decision allows the project to proceed, the second decision is whether to issue the license applied for under the NSCA. For these sorts of designated projects, should an impact assessment be required, the minister must refer the impact assessment to an integrated review panel. A review panel is a group of unbiased independent experts who are tasked with considering the information provided in the integrated assessment. The panel will be composed of several experts, and at least one member will be from the CNSC. The panel will hold a public hearing and write a report of its findings, along with recommendations for the impact assessment and the potential issuance of a license under the NSCA. One essential detail to note is that throughout an integrated assessment, IAC and the CNSC provide meaningful and robust consultation with Indigenous peoples as part of the integrated assessment process. We do this through the points we have noted here. And so for the overview of the integrated assessment process, the early stages of the process, which begins with the proponent submission of their initial project description, involves early engagement with the public and Indigenous nations and communities to identify concerns and identify the information required for the integrated assessment. Next, OPG will be provided with a clear information requirement and prepare its relevant studies for an impact assessment. Once the impact statement is deemed sufficient, an appointed review panel will hold a public hearing to hear directly from participants and Indigenous nations and communities about their views. The panel then uses that information to develop an impact assessment report, which it provides to the minister. Afterward, the governor and council determines whether the project can proceed, considering its impacts and mitigation measures. If the impact assessment decision is positive, the review panel, as a panel of the commission, can then make a decision on the initial site preparation license. And then finally, following decision-making, IAC and the CNSC ensure that the approved project complies with all conditions and that its impacts are monitored. So I'd like to step into the first next step so you can know what is coming and when. So OPG submitted their initial project description on December 16th. And we are currently holding a public comment period from January 12th to February 11th. We'll then provide a summary of issues to OPG. They will then provide a response outlining how they will address the issues. Following our receipt of their response, the minister decides whether an IA is necessary. We will then post a notice of commencement. And finally, the minister makes the decision to refer the impact assessment to a review panel. So now, in being conscious of time, we'll quickly go through how the public can participate in the integrated assessment process. So there's many ways. The first is to attend a public information session that's either hosted by us, IAC and the CNSC, or the proponent to ask questions and share their views. So we are currently holding our public comment period, and we have some public information sessions. So this Saturday, January 24th, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., we're hosting our open house in Port Hope at 459 Prof Street. And next week, we're hosting 2 virtual sessions, one in the evening and one in the afternoon. The public is also invited to visit our Canadian Impact Assessment Registry page with this reference number where they can sign up for notifications or submit a comment. And then, of course, they could always submit their comments and questions to our inbox, or also email us to add their email to the project's distribution list. Finally, we list here why the public should participate in our public comment period. And lastly, to support public participation in the integrated assessment process, funding is available to individuals, incorporated not-for-profit organizations, and Indigenous groups. However, they must meet the criteria listed on this slide. So thank you so much. We are open to questions and comments. I'll delegate that over to my colleagues.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation and the overview. It's, I think, very helpful in terms of giving us a grounding. I'm going to just kick off and ask the question of I'm hoping that all the communications around this announcement have clarified that Wesleyville is in fact in Port Hope, not near Port Hope. So I just wanted to get clarification on that. And secondly, just ask the question of whether or not you may consider changing the email address to which people can provide their comments to Port Hope instead of Wesleyville. So I'll leave those questions for you to answer. Have we lost our participants? Oh, no.
Hello,
Okay.
I'm here to
Okay.
answer. Yeah, thank you for the comments and the added context. I understand we do have the language near Port Hope in some of our postings and are looking forward to correcting that in our next round of communications. And as for the email address, in our system, the project is called New Nuclear at Wesleyville. So we've used the Wesleyville name for the email address to represent the name of the project, not the location of the project. And one of the things that we have considered is having an email address that can be translated in both English and French. So that's why we have just the one word Wesleyville at IAC and AEIC at gc.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll have ongoing conversations about that. Okay, so moving around the table, I'm going to ask my colleagues if they have any questions to our presenters. Councillor Todd.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at the slide that says overview of integrated assessment process, and at the sorry. I'm looking at the slide that says overview of integrated assessment process, and at the assess part, it has the bubble underneath that says, are there any significant federal effects? And I'm curious, is the assessment always just how this has negative or positive impacts on federal, or is this also provincial, local? How does that work?
Hi there, Julie Lowry. Again, I'm the panel manager at the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. So this project, if an impact assessment were required, would, given that nuclear activities are a federal activity, it would look at all impacts both in federal jurisdiction and those the health, social, and economic impacts, which are typically outside of federal jurisdiction, except in the case when it is a federal activity.
So just maybe as a point of clarification, I think most of us know that Section 91 and 92 of the Constitution mean that there's different roles and responsibility for the federal government versus the provincial government. But I think what we're trying to get at is, does the federal assessment actually then trickle down to considerations of what might be in the provincial domain and what actually would fall under our local domain as well?
Hi, everyone. I'll take this question. My name is Katie DeChanchi, the director of the Review Panel Division at IAC. So as Julie indicated, the Impact Assessment Act, in which this project, whether it be required, would then be subject to an assessment that would look at all adverse federal effects. But given that nuclear is under federal jurisdiction, it would all encompass the environmental, health, socioeconomic effects of the project. In this particular case as well, in Ontario, we are going to cooperate with our provincial ministries to see if they have other permits that they may require or what other regulations may be applicable. But in the typical case of nuclear, we haven't seen that environmental assessment be required for nuclear projects in Ontario. Subject for us to still do that cooperation with Ontario and determine what their level of involvement will be. But to answer your question, this would not replace municipal regulation or regulatory requirements for the project. Those would still be applicable as well.
So I'm just going to follow up on this and, ask, we've heard a lot in the news recently about one project, one review, which brings together some of the requirements from both the federal level and the provincial level as well. So could you comment on whether or not there's an intention for this to be one project, one review process that would tick all the boxes that are required from the federal level as well as the provincial level? And then, of course, in terms of municipal impacts, I'm not quite sure we've got the answer that Councillor Todd is looking at, because it's very important for us as a municipality to have a fulsome understanding of those impacts at the local level, and ideally for us to be driving those impact assessments ourselves.
So maybe for the first part, so we do have a recently signed agreement between Ontario and Government of Canada in terms of cooperation with respect to that commitment of one project, one review. That's certainly one of the objectives under our legislation as well of the Impact Assessment Act, is we are striving to achieve that objective of one project, one review. So as you mentioned earlier, this is early days, and part of what we do in this early phase of the process is engage with our provincial ministries to determine how best to achieve that one project, one review. So one of the plans that we would come out with at the end of this early stage of the process is what we call a cooperation plan, which would lay out how we would envision achieving that objective of one project, one review with them, and how we would incorporate any information they would be looking for, or how we would best make sure that information is shared with them for the purposes of their permitting process. So we're not asking the proponent to provide duplicative information. In terms of the municipal impacts, when we say that the impact assessment would be all encompassing, looking at the effects from the project, it would be also at the local level. It would look at what the effects would be in your municipality, whether it be like other projects that we've been looking at with a similar lens, looking at what impacts there would be on infrastructure, services, the social dynamics of the community. All of those would be the different types of effects that we look at. So hopefully that clarifies and answers the question.
I think Councillor Todd has a follow-up.
I do, thank you. And it pertains to the exact same process that you've laid out, because in a similar fashion then, when we get to the decide portion of this image, one of the things that's notes is what federal conditions must be met. And I'm curious as to whether or not the same applies to municipal.
So it wouldn't be to that level in terms of including municipal conditions. But however, having said that, from other experiences on projects, those would be certain things that are, carried out sort of in parallel to that process, or where governments are speaking with proponents and speaking through what those conditions would be. There have been instances where we may have, in the case that this is an integrated review panel, a panel may acknowledge that there are going to be conditions set upon the proponent by the municipal government that would address some of the concerns heard during the process that had to do with infrastructure or the services that I was mentioning earlier. So it doesn't have the requirement to include municipal conditions within that decision statement. But it does sort of take that into account if that is what is heard, and it takes into account if that resolves issues that are heard from municipality and concerned citizens. It would take that into account in terms of how issues are resolved through the process. But we are just sort of bound by it being conditions that are within federal jurisdiction that are put upon a proponent.
Councillor Clare.
I appreciate your last comment there, that it would look to address concerns that are raised by the municipality as well as concerned citizens. But I didn't notice anywhere in the process as laid out in the presentation where the role of the municipality is. So I appreciate, maybe the intent was really to get it out to the public about how individual members of the public can participate. But could you speak to the role, if any, of the municipality? Where do we fit in an official capacity in the impact assessment process? How will we be providing input? And importantly, is there any decision-making role for the municipality in the approval process for a project of this nature?
Sure. So this is why we've, thank you for having us. This is part of our broader engagement that we're planning on doing at the early stages, there's definitely opportunity to participate and work through how the municipality and particularly the municipal government wishes to participate. As I mentioned earlier, on a different context, talking about the different plans that we come out with in this early stage of the process. Another plan that we look for input on during this stage is what we call our public participation plan. So really looking for feedback during these early stages of how different target groups of the public, so whether it be municipal governments, non-government organizations, citizen groups, or just individual members of the public, how they wish to participate, or local communities that represent the community in different sort of groups. We really want to understand what would be the best engagement methods to utilize, and how each of those different audiences wish to participate in the process. That really helps us gather that information and figure out how best to adopt the things that we're hearing in terms of the best levels of engagement, or the best ways to reach community members, because we may not live in the community, so we don't know what is the best forum. So we're really in information gathering stage at this stage, where we really want to hear what may be best for you and your community on how to do so, and then we would reflect that into this plan, and then it would be incorporated in terms of how we implement that throughout the process. So really looking to you this evening, and in other ways, if you wish to write us comments, as Alessandra walked through, there's different ways in which to participate in the process. Really that this is the reason that we're here tonight, and wanting to just better get a sense of that.
Okay, thank you very, very much for that. I'm actually going to turn it over to the CIO for a second to actually highlight the opportunity that the municipality has to comment on this process in the early stages, and what role we can have in the early part of this process in terms of articulating the position of the municipality and any input that we want to share in terms of the process overall.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mayor Hankivsky. It's really interesting. I think under the IAC process, the municipality, even though we are a host community, is not elevated in position or, an ability to comment. We are considered other jurisdiction equivalent to public. So our ability to comment will come through the public consultation period, which has just opened now and is open till February 11th. The senior leadership team did meet today to review the project description, and in light of, what we want to see carve out for council, what we think the impact assessment should focus on from a municipal perspective. To Councillor Todd's question, asked a few times, is, what is our municipal, how much impact can it have on the municipality? And that's what we've taken on as a senior leadership team, to come up with those value propositions that we need to move forward. So Leo and Carolyn Deloitte, our consultants, are working on this to really help us navigate the impact assessment. Carolyn Deloitte has an extensive background in impact assessment, has helped shape this conversation. We will be coming to council on February 3rd with a staff report to get your input. Staff are going to come up with their suggested recommendations to understand that value ecosystem components that we want the impact assessment in the federal government to take into account for this municipality. And then we will ask councils to further input. We have a tight deadline. It's only a 30-day comment period ending February 11th. We're coming February 3rd, seeking your input to have, and we will be sharing that with the Impact Assessment Committee.
Councillor Clare.
Yeah, just in follow-up, I think, thank you so much for that, and I look forward to hearing that report, and I'm glad to hear that we're going to be participating in an official capacity. It is really concerning to me to hear that a level of government is being treated as equivalent to a member of the public. That's concerning to me in a process about something so significant for us as a potential host community. I did want to follow up, though, because there was a second part to my question, which is about if there is a role for the municipality in terms of decision making around the approval or whether the project moves forward. That's a question I get asked regularly already, have been for months by the public, is to understand, does this council, does the municipality actually get a say at the end of the day about whether the project is approved.
So in terms of sorry, I think that question was directed at IAC back at us. So really take your other comments to be maybe before I answer that question in terms of, the level of engagement that the municipality, that the municipal government is looking to have. And we certainly want to hear more about that and integrate that into our process and how we can make sure that the municipal government has the opportunity to express their concerns and ask questions, and for us to have more meaningful engagement with you. It's certainly something that we want to take away from this and get your feedback on. So really appreciate that feedback. In terms of decision making, there wouldn't necessarily be decision making by the municipal government on the impact assessment itself. So as Alessandra walked through, it would be, if it were to be required to be an impact assessment, then the decision makers at the very end of the process is governor and council of federal cabinet decision that would make the decision as to whether it is within the public interest for the project to proceed. Having said that, the public interest determination has to consider the different concerns heard throughout the process. It's really important for us to make sure that those decision makers have heard from anyone who is interested or anyone who may be potentially impacted by the project, and that they've had their voices heard. So to your question, in terms of whether there's a role for the municipal government to play, absolutely, in informing that decision making. So it's going to be really important for us to have you be engaged in the process and for your voices to be heard. And we can talk about what those methods or what that looks like. But what's important about this process is that the review panel will carry out panel hearings, and then there's an opportunity to be heard through there. But ourselves at IAC, not solely at the hearings, we also pride ourselves on making sure that there's meaningful engagement throughout the process. So the way that we design it, we'll want to take your feedback, but it's also important for us to make sure that the views and the concerns make it to the decision maker. So everything is very transparent about how we run the process. All of the comments are available and publicly available on our website on the registry. And so all of that needs to be taken into consideration by the panel when they're making their conclusions and recommendations, but also by the decision maker. So there's no weighting in terms of the comments that are heard. There is just that assurance that that information is provided to the decision maker so that they can make the best informed decision on whether this is within the public interest or not.
Thank you. Any other questions around the table? Okay, well, thank you very much for the presentation. The recommended motion is for us to receive the delegation for information. Can I get a mover and seconder on that? Moved by Councillor Todd, second by Councillor Clare. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on now to our public comment period. It's now time for our public comment period. As per our procedural bylaw, the purpose of the public comment period is for members of the public to provide comments on items that are on today's agenda. If you have questions related to an item that's not on today's agenda, we can wait until question period for that. And I request that you keep your comments brief and respectful. And I also remind council members that no questions or comments can be directed to those providing public comments this evening. So if anybody would like to provide a public comment, I invite you up to the podium. Looks like maybe everybody's waiting for question period. Fair enough. Moving on to item number 9, correspondence. 9.1, Trent Conservation Coalition Source Protection Committee regarding municipal representative for the Trent Conservation Coalition Source Protection Committee to represent the Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority, and Councillor Mink is going to speak to this correspondence.
Thank you. So this is the Trent, just got to get the right name here. The Trent Conservation Coalition Source Protection Committee is a joint committee with 5 conservation authorities. One of the roles of conservation authorities is source water protection. So this is a committee that has representatives on it. So we're just being asked as a member municipality of the GRCA to endorse Shelley Cuddy. She was the only person who applied or was recommended, and she has the qualifications. So it's just a procedural ask at this point.
Thank you. So we do have the recommended motion that the correspondence from GRCA regarding the appointment be received and that the Municipality of Port Hope Council endorse the recommendation of Shelley Cuddy to the Trent Conservation Coalition Source Protection Committee as a GRCA municipal representative. So can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Binks, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Thank you for bringing that forward. Moving on to item number 10, consent agenda, adoption of minutes. Items listed under the consent agenda are considered collectively as one motion. Council members may request that specific items be removed for separate discussion, deliberation, and or action. The consent items are listed on the agenda. Would anybody like to remove any of these for separate discussion this evening? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to call for a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes as listed. Moved by Councillor Clare, seconded by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? Thank you, and that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item number 11, consent agenda advisory committee and board meetings. Would anybody like to pull anything out of this for separate discussion? If not, can I get a mover and seconder for these items? Councillor Clare moved, seconded by Councillor Less. All in favor? Passed unanimously. Moving on to item number 12, items for consideration, 12.1, 2026 strong mayor budget. Last week, we held a special council meeting to review and finalize our recommendations for the 2026 budget. It was a very collaborative process, and I appreciated everyone's input around the council table. I also really appreciate all the staff time that went into presenting the budget to us. At the meeting, my council colleagues unanimously supported my decision to further reduce the levy impact, bringing the increase down to 2.7%. It was a motion I brought forward that was unanimously supported by council. I also want to note that the reserves that have been talked about in the public around how this was going to happen is not existing reserves. They're not money that has to be put back into reserves. We're not depleting something that is currently in the municipality. This is new growth money. We are using it responsibly. We have a cushion for the upcoming years, and so it is a way to pass on some of the savings that we have realized as a municipality through our engagement with OPG and the province. And we will continue to work towards the fiscal responsibility and sustainability of this community, but with a view of the increasing cost of living that all of us are feeling. So just as a point of clarification around that. So with the work now being complete, I'm now bringing forward the budget as required under the province's strong mayor powers legislation, and I'm confident that this budget reflects our shared priorities and supports our strategic future growth for the community. So does council have any questions or comments around this? Yes, Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So I just want to thank everybody, really, staff, council, of course, Director Baxter and his team for this budget. It was, this is my 8th budget, and it was very, I don't know if enjoyable is the word, but pretty close to it. So thank you for that. So there was a few changes this year, and I did talk with staff about a couple of little bits of feedback I got, and that was the community is used to seeing the rural and the urban when they weigh in on what the dollar value will be, and understanding that there's still some tweaks and things that need to be done, but at some point in the process, before the end of the process, if we could have sort of the rural and the urban with the LLRW and the special services and everything applied, and how much the average household would be paying. If that could be posted somewhere for those residents that are used to seeing that, that would be really helpful. And I know in the budget it was blended together, so the feedback that I got is that they wanted to see that separate as they had normally seen.
So we will be, as you know, as we come to the final tax rates, right, we'll be including all different rates and the split out of it in detail. In terms of the separation between the urban and rural tax rates versus the weighted combined, we're following that based on the specific direction from council. I believe it came about 2 budgets ago. So I can go back and revisit that, but at this point, we're following the direction we've received from council.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Councillor Clare.
This is kind of an aside, but I did participate in a lunch and learn with MPAC yesterday, and they were looking for feedback for what kind of data we would like to see available to the municipality, but also members of the public on their website through a dashboard that they're looking at developing. And there was consensus at our table that it would be really helpful for residents to be able to see the spectrum of housing and property values that exists in their community so that they could understand where they sit in that. And it strikes me that that would be really helpful if they do follow through on that for residents to understand where they are relative to the average, so that when we're putting out these statements around to the average, property owner, they can understand sort of what that means for them based on where they sit in the housing mix across the community.
Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, the recommended motion is to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, second by Councillor Todd. All in favor? Thank you, and that is passed. Moving on to item 12.2. It's a staff presentation by Shrishma Dave, our clerk, regarding the 2026 municipal and school board election roles and responsibilities. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Council, for the opportunity to come to you today to present on this very important topic. So at our presentation today, this is, in all intents and purposes for Council, a kickoff of the 2026 municipal and school board election. It is not a kickoff for my team. We have been working on the municipal and school board election for the last, I want to say, 6 months. The 2026 municipal and school board election is a mouthful. So I will not be referencing it for the remainder of this presentation. I will be referencing it as the election or the municipal election, if that's all right with everyone. So as I said, today I will be speaking to the roles and responsibilities of the clerk, staff, as well as council in the administration of this election. And, I just want to start off by saying preparations are well underway. And my goal today is to provide clarity as well as reinforce some expectations so that everyone, council as well as members of the public, any potential candidates who are out there, as well as staff, have a strong understanding of what their role is in the administration of this election, and ensuring that the election is done in a democratic, transparent, and accountable manner. The purpose, my purpose tonight is not to get into the specifics of election administration. I don't want to talk about that tonight because we will be having many conversations about the elections as the next 6 to 8 months moves forward. So today is really only talking about rules and responsibilities, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end of this presentation. So to quickly recap, our municipal and school board elections take place every 4 years, and the next municipal election will take place on October 26, 2026, which is about 7 months from now, a little bit over that. Now, in 2026, the municipal election will be entirely online and via telephone, which is what we've been doing, I think, for the last 3 elections, so similar to how it was in the past. Council has voted on this method. It was a report that came to Council, I think, sometime last year. Council authorized the alternate vote method of internet and telephone voting, and that is what we're going with. Although the election is going to be online and in person, I want to reiterate the fact that it is not going to be it's not going to be an election where people don't have the opportunity to vote in person. We will be having voter assistance centers available where people who require assistance voting or want to vote in person or perhaps do not have access to telephone or internet, would like a place to go to cast their ballot. There will be voter assistance centers that are available where they can go, and we are working through what those locations and the dates that those voter assistance centers will be open. We're working through that, and we will be advertising that in line with the communications plan. All municipal employees, council, and staff all have a role to play in the municipal election, just to ensure that it is that fair, transparent process. And so I want to get a little bit into that because I think it's very important. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about some key dates. So August 21st is nomination day. So that is the last day that a candidate who is planning on running for election may register as a candidate. Nomination period opens on May 1st. So that is the first day that any candidate who is interested in running in the municipal election can register to vote. No candidate is allowed to campaign before they register as a candidate. So, if that is something that we discover, it is something that we usually tend to address and through a process that we will be thinking through. But I just want to highlight that for everyone, that no one is really allowed to be campaigning, and this is in line with the Municipal Elections Act. It is my responsibility after August 21st, once the nominations close, I review all of the candidates who have filed their nominations, and I certify those that I believe would be the official candidates, and that certification happens by August 24th. And then, as I said, voting day is October 26th. The announcement of results from that election I anticipate will happen at the close of vote. So voting will close on October 26th at 8 p.m. And I anticipate that the results will be, because it is internet and telephone, we do tend to get those results a lot faster, but within the next 2 hours is when we anticipate getting the official results of, unofficial results of the election. The official results are announced in the next 2 days. So I do want to talk a little bit about the election team. So in Port Hope, election administration is led by myself, your municipal clerk, and the core election team includes myself, the deputy clerk. Very grateful to have Devan with us, who has a lot of extensive experience in the municipal election and has already been doing some really great work with that. We have our core election team also includes legislative services staff, so Tanya Wilson, Emma McCarroll, and Carolyn Williams, who is not with us today, but she's our records and information coordinator. So I share that with you. Oh, and I also want to note that our municipal solicitor plays a very important advisory role. So we are very, very excited to have him on board as well to serve in that important advisory role. Now, although the clerk's office is responsible for election administration, the election is truly a corporate project. We rely very heavily on our communications team, led by Kate Ingram, for a variety of different communication activities. We rely on bylaw enforcement, led by Manager Dave Chatwell, HR, led by Shannon Jones, finance, of course, led by David Baxter, as well as our facilities team under Director Julia Snook. We rely on all of them to help us on this very, very hands-on deck in 2026. I reiterate, we are not the City of Toronto. We are not Burlington and Mississauga. We don't have a dedicated elections team that can work on elections activities over the course of every 4 years. We are all people who have our regular, responsibilities and roles which still continue, but then we do ensure that we all, as a corporation, take the time to do the important work of the municipal election. We set our work plan, especially legislative services and clerks, we set our work plan to ensure that the clerk staff are adjusting their responsibilities to administer the election and complete this very important work, and to ensure that it is a seamless project. As I said earlier, the planning is year-round, especially due to the magnitude of the work that is involved. And it's our center focus for 2026 and also partially for 2027, because election doesn't end once the results are announced, as many of you know, well, actually, as all of you know, because you all ran in the election in 2022, that there is campaign finance obligations that need to take place and a lot of other work that has to happen from a statutory perspective. So it is a center focus for us in 2026 and in 2027. I also want to note, I mentioned earlier that work has started about 6 months ago. And the fact of the matter is that the majority of the training that takes place with respect to the municipal election and how to administer the municipal election actually takes place in 2025 and early 2026, but mostly 2025. Our team has been involved in a lot of that training. I have been involved in creating and actually training other clerks on how to run a successful municipal election. And we have been having very regular meetings with other clerks' teams in other municipalities to talk about best practices, best procedures, ensuring that we are really in line with not just legislative compliance, but also making sure that we're optimizing all of the work that we're doing with respect to the election and really trying to make it a highly engaged process, because that is what our goal is. We had an excellent turnout in 2022, 43%. Well above the provincial average. Really, really a testament to the engagement of this community. And we are hoping this year to get to 50% if we possibly can. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the legislative framework that the election is based on. The Municipal Elections Act sets out the rules for how municipal elections are conducted in Ontario. The MEA governs the nomination process, voting procedures, campaign finance, recounts, oversight. The Act also is the piece of legislation that assigns responsibility to the clerk, and it gives me authority to perform those duties independently. So when we think about municipal elections, really it is the cornerstone, the foundation of local democracy. The MEA is designed to protect these principles. So what does that mean? If we think about the different key principles of the Municipal Elections Act, it's integrity and transparency. This means that the election has to be run honestly, impartially, and consistently throughout the municipality. The process and the timelines have to be clear, they have to be public and applied to everyone. This includes public access to information such as candidate lists, information on voting locations and methods, key dates, as well as compliance requirements. Transparency also exists to how votes are counted, how results are reported, and how issues and complaints are addressed. These are all things that are under my purview and things that I consider when I set my procedures. When we think about things like fairness and equal opportunity, every eligible elector must have fair and reasonable opportunity to vote. Every qualified candidate must have the same opportunity to campaign within the rules that are set out in the legislation. Accessibility is also critical because we have to accommodate diverse needs. No candidate and no group should be receiving preferential treatment, and that includes a sitting council. Policies and procedures are applied uniformly so that we're ensuring a level playing field for the municipal election. And this ties directly into public trust. The legitimacy of local democracy depends on the public's belief that the election is fair, secure, and accurate. So clear procedures, secure voting processes, and consistent practices contribute to the confidence of those results. We do things like audits, testing, internal controls, which are used to safeguard the voting process. This trust is strengthened when the community understands that the clerk is also acting independently and without political or even staff influence. The one thing I want everyone to remember is that the clerk, as well as the candidates and this council and staff to a certain degree as well, are accountable under the provincial legislation to ensure an election that is credible and impartial and compliant with provincial legislation. It is all of our responsibility that this is what happens for an election here in Port Hope. So talking a bit more about that and digging into our specific roles. As the clerk, I am the returning officer under the Municipal Elections Act. This means that I am responsible for the planning, organizing, as well as the delivery of the entire municipal and school board election for this municipality. So this includes everything from overseeing candidate nominations, voter services, technology, voting methods, to election staffing and training. While many divisions support this work, the clerk is the body that has ultimate responsibility for the administration of this election. Now, the MEA is very prescriptive, and it sets out the rules for how elections must be run across Ontario. So the rules that apply in Burlington and Mississauga also apply in Port Hope. It's the same thing. So we are all bound by the exact same act. And my team's job is to ensure that we follow that legislation at every single step. This includes deadlines, public notices, campaign finance requirements, as well as post-election reporting. This ensures that the process is fair and trustworthy for everyone. The Act also gives the clerk the authority to set detailed elections procedures. In fact, the Act in many cases says, when in doubt, the clerk's decision is final. It gives the clerk a fair bit of authority, and that is why the clerk has to operate independently of any sort of influence, because the clerk is the person who is the neutral body responsible for running the municipal election. The clerk is also responsible for overseeing that voting process and then, of course, issuing those official results of the election as well. Now, it is very important to emphasize that the clerk must carry out the election duties independently and without political influence. This requirement applies not just to me, but it applies to every single election worker who is under my authority. I do not support and I do not oppose any candidate, and I do not participate in any political activity related to the municipal election. I do not provide campaign or strategic advice to any candidate, and that includes a member of council who is running as a candidate in the municipal election. I do not provide any campaign advice. In my role as a statutory officer of this organization, I will continue to provide this council with procedural and legislative advice in your role as a council member. However, if a member of council will approach me or any of my staff with any sort of question related to their campaign, any sort of question related to any sort of candidate questions, they would be treated in the exact same way as any other candidate would be treated. So there is a very important distinction there that I think that the council as well as the public needs to understand. They receive the same amount of information that we provided to any other candidate. And this separation is very essential because it protects that fairness in the process and it maintains the public trust in the outcome. My responsibility is not to influence who is elected, but to ensure that the election is administered in the full compliance with provincial law. It is critically important, and I know I've said this more than once and I'll say it again, that the clerk cannot be directed or influenced by council, by individual councillors, by the CAO, by directors, or any other candidate. They are not allowed to, or they will not be able to influence the clerk in the administration of the election. It is outside of the bounds of their care and control, outside of the bounds of the responsibilities or the power that any of them hold in terms of the administration of the election. So here, I just want to provide you with some examples of administrative tasks related to the municipal election, because I have received some questions about, how much work an election actually is. I gave you a bit of that information earlier on in my presentation, but this is just a small example of some of the work that we do when it comes to the administration of the election. Very, very involved process. We've already started much of this work, and we're going to be completing a lot of it over the course of the next couple of weeks as well. It's not an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea of the amount of work and time that goes into the planning and the execution of the election. It's a very, very important job. I want to also now talk a little bit about municipal staff. They play a very important supporting role in the election. So while the clerk is responsible for the administration of the election, staff across the organization will assist in a number of different ways, whether it's logistics, communications, support from facilities, coordination, etc. They really help to ensure that the process runs smoothly and that voters and candidates receive consistent service. However, it is also very important to note that municipal staff must remain neutral and objective at all times. And this is actually noted in the staff code of conduct. And is going to be, it was training that we provided to to staff in 2022, and that we are going to be providing again, just as a refresher to our staff members. Staff do not engage in any political activity during hours of work. They do not engage in any sort of campaigning during hours of work. And as I said, they must follow the staff code of conduct, as well as any other relevant municipal and provincial rules and responsibilities. So they cannot wear, for example, or display any campaign materials while working. If they see a candidate or a council member wearing campaign materials on municipal property, they would be required to ask that person to remove that or to leave the building, because that is not allowed on municipal property. They are also not allowed to support or assist a campaign during work hours, and they cannot provide research, advice, or any sort of special assistance to candidates. So if a candidate, or for example, a current council member who is running for the 2026 election contacts Director Baxter on a Friday afternoon and asks him to pull together some figures because that candidate has to go to a debate that afternoon, then that is not information then Director Baxter will probably contact me. And then I will contact that candidate and have a conversation with them, right? But really, that would not be that person's role. If there is a question in your role as a sitting council member, as a candidate, if they have a question as a regular resident, or even as a candidate, we will have a process for us addressing those concerns, but they are outside of the realm of staff influence. Staff do not assist campaigns and do not provide research or advice to council members or to any candidate who are running for the upcoming municipal election. Now, council also has an important but also a very limited role in the municipal election. Now, during an election period, council continues to carry out its regular governance role. So the business of the municipality still continues, and as council, you are required to continue on with that. If lame duck provisions apply, following the close of nomination, that is when I would be coming to this council and I would be providing guidance on next steps. But that's something that we will probably be addressing sometime in July or August. Council must also respect that the municipal clerk has independent legislative authority as the returning officer. So, yeah, similar to how I stated before, you cannot direct or influence me. You cannot interfere in how the election is administered. Now, members of council are required to follow all applicable legislation, bylaws, as well as all election-related policies during this time. Council plays a very important role in maintaining public trust in the election process by modeling respectful civil behavior and supporting open participation in democracy. Council very, supported the Elect Respect pledge recently, and I was very proud of our council for doing that, and hope that that is the kind of rhetoric that continues while the municipal election is taking place as well, because that is important, that is the kind of environment that council cultivates, and that is the kind of environment I will be cultivating even with our staff in the administration of this election. Now, council does have some limited responsibility in approving certain election-related policies and bylaws. And they're also responsible for appointing members to the Compliance Audit Committee. So at the next Committee of the Whole meeting, I will be bringing an election, municipal policy for corporate use of resources during an election period. And in line with the MEA, council is required to approve a policy that is like that by March 31st. We approved a very strong policy in March in 2022. Many of you must have read that when you were, and the public would have, any candidate would have read that. And we will be bringing forward some minor amendments to that policy because it is a very strong policy. Now, one of the things I do want to also note is that council really should not be using, they cannot be using their position to access or benefit any information or benefit any candidate. This includes themselves, of course, while they're running. They also cannot request or expect any sort of preferential treatment from municipal staff related to campaign activities. So really, really important for you to think through what that role is. One of the things I do want to say from an information perspective, I did this in 2022 with the previous council. I did this with this council in 2024 when we had the by-election. I will continue to come to council and provide you with regular updates once the election work really starts in earnest. And I will be providing that information to you here. It will be part of a broader communication plan that we're going to be building. And I'm always open to any sort of suggestions that you may have, with the understanding that, obviously it would be taken as a suggestion, and ultimately the decision-making authority will lie with the clerk who is responsible for administering the election. It is really why the election system is structured in this way, to protect that neutrality, to protect the integrity of the election. Each role within the election, whether it is council, clerk, or staff, is very clearly defined, and respecting these roles ensures that the 2026 2026 municipal election is fair, it is transparent, and it is democratic for the people of Port Hope. So what comes next? As I said earlier, the work in the election is underway. We're bringing that use of corporate resources policy to council in February 3rd, and we're also in the process of finalizing and also starting the execution of a very robust communications plan and a structured communications plan, which is going to ensure accurate as well as accessible information for voters and candidates. This will include things like website updates, publications, targeted messaging, as well as accessibility-focused outreach. And as I said earlier, council will continue to receive these periodic updates from my table here at council meetings, and of course for all candidates and the members of the public as well. We're in the process of making our porthopevotes.ca website live. That's likely going to be going live by next week, which will have some initial information for members of the public on how to register to vote or to check to see if they're on the voters list. So all of that information will be going live next week. And in fact, we've already started some social media on that as well, and we'll be spreading that, because right now, really what we want members of the public to do is to ensure that they're on the voters list. And then we'll be moving forward with other communications as well. So that really brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide this information to you, and I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you to our very enthusiastic clerk. It's wonderful because, as you rightly note, we have had such great turnouts for our elections, and the enthusiasm that you bring, the passion to the job, I think reflects in that. So I'm going to start by asking you a question, and that is, what is the municipality with the highest voter turnout for local elections?
That's a really great question, and we can look into that for you. But I will say this. In 2022, we had 43%. Brighton had 46%. So I really want to beat Brighton.
Okay, and we really appreciate you setting that target of 50%. I think that's terrific. Councillor Clare.
Yeah, I have a question just on the timeline. It's actually not even about the election. It's about the dates post-election. I'm curious to understand why the gap between Election Day, inauguration, and onboarding of the new council. I know it's standard. It looks very similar to what happened in 2022. But I'm curious to understand why that delay is there. And in that period of time post-election, before the next council is sworn in and the training has taken place, what limitations does that pose for the municipality in terms of key decisions or that may need to be made during that time? And a second question, I'm going to slip it in, is will there be an opportunity for the sitting council to provide some input into, I see there's 2 training days, which is great, to some input into some of the things that maybe in hindsight we would have felt helpful to help inform that plan?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. So I'm going to answer your first question, and if I don't answer everything, please let me know, Councillor Holloway-Wadhwani. So the municipal election, the voting day is October 26th, and then after that, we have a few days before we have to certify official results. We have reporting obligations, post-election reporting obligations to the province. We have work that we need to do in terms of, in all honesty, logistical work that we need to do, right? With the incoming council, getting them things like they're getting their contact information, getting their laptops, really trying to figure out all of the logistical things to try to figure out, okay, how do we contact them, what kind of things we need to get. So we need a little bit of time following a municipal election just to get a lot of those things in place. We will be doing a lot of that prep work, and that's why it is that hands-on project, right? IT is involved in that, HR is involved in that, filling out all of the forms, getting them in the room, getting them to get some discussion, so maybe some informal conversations, not as a body, but as just individuals, just to get idea of their preferences for cell phones and things like that. So, and also to give our teams a little bit of a break, right? Because we work very long hours in October especially. So, many of us like to take at least a couple of days off, right, after the election is done, so that we can have a bit of a break. So we do that. Now, if you may, and I know that I brought a couple of reports to council last year, but when I brought the report for the elections calendar, I brought that with the intention that there would be a inauguration day, which is in line with our provincial legislation. Typically, inauguration does take place in the second week of November for most municipalities. So we like to keep in line with other municipalities and what they're doing. So ours is on November 17th, I believe. And then we wanted to do the 2 days of council orientation only because we wanted to put that in the calendar itself so that when we provide that information to candidates, candidates are already aware that they have to set those 2 days aside for orientation, right? Because you are part-time councillors. Many council members have full-time jobs. So we do want to give that information to them as much in advance as possible. So that's the reason that we set the dates the way that we did. And then following that, the first meeting of council will be December 1st. So there's not a ton of time in between in those dates, but we just do it in a way just to give ourselves enough time from a logistical perspective and to give you as incoming council members some time to get all of your ducks in the row, because some of you may be surprised if you win an election and may have to readjust your lives a little bit, right? So we've had that happen in the past as well. So we do want to give it a bit of time for that sense as well. And then to your second point, Councillor Holloway Wadwani, absolutely. In fact, I will be reaching out to council later on in this process to get some feedback from council members on what they would like to see in council orientation. And I know the CAO and I have chatted quite a bit about that because we would like to have a much more coordinated approach to the orientation process.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any questions? Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So I have a question regarding where you say use their position to advance the political campaign, as well as the timeline of May. So I'm not on social media, but there's some councillors who regularly talk about what we have done and what we would be doing. So what would your advice be of that gray area where it may appear that they're campaigning, even though they're just doing their role? And the second question is, what would you say to whether it's an incumbent councillor or somebody else, using photos of their time on council with other council members, staff, or municipal property in their campaign material, whether that's posted on social media or in print?
So so to answer both of those questions, I just want to note that we will be bringing forward a use of corporate resources for municipal election purposes to council for their consideration on February 3rd. It speaks to both those issues. And so in all honesty, the fact of the matter is that if for any campaign purposes, you're not allowed to use any sort of municipal resource. So, being in this room, like putting a photo of yourself from this table, you can't do that, right, for a campaign purpose. However, when it comes to that gray area, it's called a gray area for a reason, right? Because of the fact that council, as a sitting council member, has full right to speak to the work that they're doing as a council member. I don't see any concerns with that. However, I just think that there is a level of discretion that needs to be used. And of course, if it's being used to advance their campaigns, then that can be problematic. And I would urge, I would urge them to perhaps seek some legal advice if that is something that they are concerned about.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for all that information. It's a lot to digest, and I'm sure we'll be continuing getting some information from you as the months go by. So the recommended motion is to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Adams, second by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? And that is passed. Moving on to Item 12.3, Report ES0126, Viola Water Technologies Membrane Replacement Agreement. Does anybody have any questions or comments on this? Seeing none, the recommended motion is listed on the agenda. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. Moving on to 12.4, Report FS0126, 2026 Interim Tax Levy Bylaw. Does anybody have any questions on this item? Seeing none. Oh, do you have a question, Councillor Less? Please go ahead.
I'd like David to explain a chapter and verse. It should only take you about an hour and a half, right, David? No.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Less, second by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? Thank you, and that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item 12.5, Report PRC 0126, Renaming Rights, Town Park Recreation Centre Courtyard. Does anybody have any questions on this? Seeing none, I do have a question on this, and that is, do we actually have a policy on corporate naming and sponsorship that is broad for the entire municipality?
Good evening, and thank you for the question through you to you, Mayor. We do have a naming of parks and facilities policy that addresses the components that was addressed or identified through the establishment of the fundraising campaign specifically for Town Park Recreation Center. We are in the process of updating the donations and sponsorship policy that essentially go hand in hand for larger donations from a naming rights standpoint.
And just to clarify, that would go beyond just Parks and Rec. That would be for the entire municipality.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful. Okay, can I get a mover and seconder for this? Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Less. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. And now for extremely exciting item on our agenda. 12.6, report LLS 0126, Re-Equity, Diversity, and Inclusivity Strategy with an Anti-Oppression Framework. And I'm going to turn it over to our CAO for a few introductory comments before I ask for questions from council.
Thank you, Mayor. Absolutely very excited to finally bring this over the home plate and deliver this to council. This, for multiple reasons, has languished in the bowels of many departments since council, put this request forward in 2023. I think this is, a combination of, successive changing leadership over the years, and I'm very happy to say when I saw this, I was really impressed and pushed forward to get this over the plate. The steering group, the senior leadership team has, reviewed it extensively. It is a comprehensive document. It is a long document, but it covers, I think, most of those, those key inputs for equity, diversity, and inclusion policy and framework. It's a framework to help us guide us, move us forward in line with the strategic plan. So very excited to hear council's feedback on this. It is an opportunity for us as staff to take that away, incorporate any changes you wish to have, and really entrench this into our organization, but entrench it into our community. And we've heard people loud and clear, and we're ready to deliver that.
Okay, we'll go around the table. Yes, Councillor Todd.
Thank you very much. And actually, I have some prepared comments for this. So I wanted to begin by acknowledging the work that has gone into the EDI strategy and framework and the accompanying staff report. This is a serious, well-researched document, and it reflects a thoughtful effort to ground EDI work in municipal realities. I also appreciate the transparency in the staff report about the staffing and leadership changes that contributed to the delay. At the same time, Council has a responsibility to be clear about what we asked for and where we are now. In June of 2023, Council directed staff to prepare and bring forward an equity, diversity, and inclusivity policy with an anti-oppression framework, and to do so prior to the end of 2023. What is before us today is not that policy. It is a strategy and framework intended to guide work over the next 2 to 4 years in the absence of a formal policy. The strategy does not explain how it leads to a formal EDI policy or when Council should expect to see one. The staff report similarly does not propose a timeline for completing the EDI policy that Council originally directed, and instead contemplates another future follow-up strategy. These gaps matter, especially given where we are in this Council's term. We are in the final year of our mandate, and in short order, this Council will no longer be in a position to meaningfully oversee new policy development. If we approve this strategy without clear direction and timelines, we risk transferring an unresolved obligation to the next Council, effectively resetting accountability and commitment for establishing an EDI policy for the municipality. I want to be clear that this is not a rejection of the work that has been done. The strategy is useful and should inform future decisions related to the EDI policy, but it should not be treated as a substitute for the policy that Council explicitly requested and remains outstanding. The responsible path forward is to approve this strategy as interim guidance, and at the same time, direct staff to bring forward the formal EDI policy within this council's remaining term of effectiveness. This approach respects the work completed to date and allows us to close the loop on our own decision rather than leaving it unfinished. And Madam Mayor, I would just mention that I do have an alternate motion when we get to that part.
Thank you for that comment. I see that the CAO would like to comment. I just want to add one thing to just something that you had mentioned, and that is whether in fact there is an explanation for why there was this delay. Anyway.
Sorry, for clarification, delay in policy versus...
No, why there was a delay when we did put forward this motion in 2023, appreciating, of course, that you're new to the role, but what is the explanation for why we didn't get it in 2023 as requested?
I can't speak directly to the CAO at the time or the department, originally responsible for this, the Corporate Services Department, originally was the leader on this project, so I can't answer what happened at that point in time. The direction, sorry, I'm not sure if I can answer that question in totality. I will say, to Councillor Todd, Councillor Todd's, we got, when we worked with the consultant on this, and when I looked at what this, I think the entire SLT realized that this wasn't a policy. This was much more of a framework, a direction, an approach. I think that's why we streamlined it, we refined this framework, wanted to bring it to council to make sure that we're on the right path. So then we can now inform the policy. We have a very loose policy, we work with our consultant. I can't disagree with you. Like, that was the sentiment I would say across all of the senior leadership team. This is not a policy. And instead of wasting more time at this point in time, if we're so far off base in this direction of this framework, it's the basis for that policy. So I would love to hear from council that the content is mostly captures the intent back from 2023, and more than happy to entertain a proposed motion and get that policy over the edge.
Councillor Clare.
Yeah, I think I appreciate that, and I'm glad that we're in agreement that this isn't the policy that was requested. I did want to just add some specifics. I think I fully support the comments by Councillor Todd, but I think, I was the seconder on that motion when we brought it forward as a notice of motion, and I think the language was very deliberate in the actual notice of motion. And I appreciate that it's been printed both in the staff report and in the strategy document itself. But when we said that we wanted something that ensured that municipal policies, procedures, bylaws, practices are designed to be inclusive, and what we see in this strategy is a recommendation that a plan be developed for how we do that. To me, that it's not just that it's not in policy language, it does not actually fulfill the intent, which is we want that happening now. We don't want that happening in this vague 2 to 4 years from now as we work through these next steps. The same thing, providing regular training to municipal employees. I don't want to see a plan for how that's going to happen. I want to see that that is happening now, that this is starting to happen. So I think lots of great preamble for those that aren't already familiar with intersectionality and great work of GBA Plus and things like that. But largely what I see in the recommendations is just more words being added to the words that were already in the motion that called for the development of the policy. So I think maybe I'm a bit more concerned than my council colleagues, but I'm concerned that this is really pushing this into the future when it was really established as a priority really early in this term of council. So I'm definitely with Councillor Todd. I do expect to see the fulfillment of that council direction in relatively short order, given how long it's taken. And which is not to say there's nothing in this strategy that I take issue with. It's all good stuff. But it's really just hasn't pushed things very far from where we started in the motion and the discussions that prompted this piece of work. So I'm looking forward to to some discussion about where we go from here to make sure that we can close this off properly and actually get to the work of implementing the policy.
Thank you, Councillor Clare. And I just wanted to add one thing about that is that I think in the motion that went forward, it's obviously a resource issue around how this is going to be operationalized and how quickly, because with anything like this, right, it's got a lot of steps. If you're talking about everything from the education piece to actually what's going to happen with, say, if you're going to be reviewing every single policy that exists throughout the municipality. So it will have serious resource implications in terms of, is it going to be operational light? Is it going to be systematically integrated into every single part of the municipality? Will be huge implications. Councillor Less.
Yeah, I kind of disagree. I don't think you can mandate a policy that should be really be replaced by following common sense, fairness, and the principles of treating everyone with respect. The attitude should be predicated on not that you shall do these things, but you should do these things. And I think you can wrap that up in a policy.
Councillor Mink.
So thank you. I have a question about kind of along the same lines as Councillor Clare, but we made a few decisions where we referred or deferred those decisions to the EDI policy or when the EDI policy came out. So my question is, are we keeping track of those decisions that we referred to, and how would we handle them? And while we're going through this process, when we have other decisions that come forward that we should be referring to this policy in the next 2 years, how would we address that at that time? Obviously, we don't want to compound those issues. We want to deal with them as they come, because recognizing we have been compounding some decisions waiting for this policy.
Yeah, so through you, Mayor, to Councillor Mink, the staff report references those. Actually, I think it was 3 different staff reports that were pushed down to be evaluated in line with the lens of the EDI policy. That being said, obviously we have our work ahead to get this over the line quickly. We don't want this backlog of future staff reports or future council motions not being done because of the EDI. So we've heard it loud and clear. We're going to move forward with this as quickly as possible. I'm looking forward to entertaining Councillor Todd's motion and put a timeline, and we'll get on it for sure. Heard it loud and clear.
So I think on that point, Councillor Todd, let's see the motion.
Let's see what's on the table. So I think we're going to have that put up on the screen, and happy to read that out if that's helpful. So the motion that I'm putting forward tonight is, and in the spirit of what the CAO had said and the work that was being done, Madam Mayor, that Council approved the equity, diversity, and inclusivity strategy with an anti-oppression framework as strategic guidance to inform municipal operations, and that Council directs staff to prepare and bring forward for council consideration a formal equity, diversity, and inclusivity policy with an anti-oppression framework informed by the strategy or by the approved strategy and framework, and that the proposed EDI policy fulfill and satisfy the requirements set out in Council Resolution 28/2023, and that the proposed EDI policy shall at a minimum address mandatory requirements and accountability mechanisms, roles and responsibilities for implementation and oversight, reporting and review requirements, and how the policy will be maintained and updated over time. And finally, that staff report back to Council with the proposed EDI policy no later than 3 months from the date of this resolution to ensure Council consideration within the current term. Everything that's in there is already included in the strategy, so the work has been done. It's simply a matter of lifting it so that we have a policy. Yeah, but certainly the work that's been done, as I said earlier, I commend staff, and I think the work that's been done is important work. Now we just need to lift it so that we get the policy completed, so that we fulfill what we had asked for in the beginning.
Thank you for that, Councillor Todd. And I'm assuming that there's a seconder on this. Yes, are you seconding? Okay. Okay, so we have a seconder from Councillor Clare. Any further comments? Yes, Councillor Clare.
Might I add, like, I appreciate, the 3 months, but I do think we have a decent framework here in the form of 10 very clear questions that we can and should be asking. Can I also request that we don't wait until the approval of a policy 3 months from now to begin using this framework when, for any future things that are coming to this council table, that we can trust that they've been run through this framework, because there's no need to wait on that.
And I'm going to suggest a friendly amendment. I don't think 3 months is what we should be waiting for on this one. I'm cranky on this one, very cranky. I feel like this is one of the things that we were really passionate about at the council table in many ways, and it should have been brought forward. And so I realize it's a little bit of a hangover from previous leadership on many different levels, but I'd like to turn it back to the CAO and ask what's the most aggressive timeline you can be using to get back to us on this. I think 3 months is too long.
I don't disagree, Your Worship. I was going to say, I don't even think we need that much time. I would say ideally no later than March, right? So we're out a month and a bit, 2 months at absolute minimum, but it just is going to be a function of when we bring it to a committee of the whole versus council. So I'm targeting early March is what my goal would be. I also suggest that we those three staff reports or motions that if council wants to start entertaining them, similar to how Councillor Clare, you wanted staff to start implementing the tools, I would also suggest that council, maybe consider the 3 outstanding items in the same lens of the framework and the strategy, as opposed to waiting till the policy, but that'll be a council decision.
Councillor Todd.
Yeah, I'm open to all that. And in fact, by putting forward this motion, and item number 1 the intention was certainly, the good work that's already been done there. It can certainly guide and inform municipal operations once this is adopted, so we can get moving on that straight away. I'm happy to change the dates and shorten it. I had put it to no later than, expecting that staff would come back a sooner date. Happy to hold the feet to the fire and bring it down to 2 months,
6 weeks,
6 weeks, 5, 4, 3. No, I'm looking at.
I do want to note from a procedural perspective, because there's a mover and seconder and the motion's on the floor.
Sure.
In order for any change to happen, it would require a mover and seconder with an amendment. It sounds to me like if you're comfortable with the language as it is, with the understanding that the CAO has committed to an accelerated timeline, this gives the 3 months with the understanding. If that's but that's completely up to you. I'll leave that to council's consideration.
But I am open to it for sure.
This is a trust me moment. And we're going to be asking the questions around the timelines. I'm happy to keep it as it is, but this is not going to be one that we let slide any further. I think this is it's a priority. And certainly, I'm going to be looking for it in March. Any other? Are you good? Okay. All right. All in favor? Thank you. And that is passed. Okay, moving on to item number 13. We don't have any committee reports and recommendations. We don't have any notice of motions. We don't have any notice of motions? Okay. Item number 15, bylaws consent agenda. There's only one bylaw on the agenda today. Can I get a mover and seconder on the interim tax levy bylaw? Moved by Councillor Clare, seconded by Councillor Adam. All in favor? That is passed unanimously. It's now time for question period. It's your opportunity to ask brief, direct questions of council members about matters of municipal business. It's not a time to be asking questions of staff. Any operational questions should be directed to staff and will be directed to staff if you ask them. So please keep your questions concise. And if you have a question, please approach the microphone. I'm so sorry. Yes, we're going to pause and let staff leave. Sorry, staff. Okay. Well, now we'll take questions now at the podium. If you do have a question, please come to the podium and state your name. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions this evening. So we're going to move on to the confirmatory bylaw. It's now time for the confirmatory bylaw. The bylaw confirms proceedings that took place this evening and provides for formal adoption through the bylaw. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Todd, second by Councillor Darrell. All in favour? That is passed. This concludes our business to be covered on today's agenda. We've reached the end for today and I'm positioned to adjourn at 8:33 p.m. Thank you.